This is a talk I gave a while ago. It's going to be a little rusty, sorry. I'm going to be talking about Readline, which is the other editor that you use. I guess if you know, you use three editors, like Vim and Emacs and Readline, or something like Readline. Even if you don't think you're using Readline, if you're using the terminal, you're using Readline or something like Readline. So Readline is the line editor that was extracted from GNU's bash shell. I guess GNU bash, given that the sh is shell in bash. If you use bash, you're using Readline. If you use IRB in Ruby, you're using Readline. If you use Z shell or Z shell, you're using ZLE, which is a re-implementation of Readline, but is basically the same thing. So Readline is the line editor you use when you type things into your terminal. And we're all kind of enthusiastic about editors, given that we're here at a Vim meetup. But I think this editor gets a lot of... It just gets ignored. It gets treated like it's not really an editor, but it's actually incredibly powerful. This came up in Noah's talk about launching the terminal inside NeoVim, that you then get all the terminal key bindings, and you were talking about not using the VI mode and using the Emacs mode instead. I do the same thing, because the VI mode you get in Readline is not quite right. There are things like Control-R, which is reverse history search instead of redo. It's redo in Vim, it's reverse history search in the terminal. So the default is Emacs mode, that's what I use, that's what I'm mostly going to be talking about. So why do I say this is an editor? So you're typing in commands like echo foo bar baz, so you can enter text. That's an editory kind of thing to do. I guess I could press backspace a lot and delete some text. But what about more powerful editor functions? As Vim users, we're used to being able to do fancy things. One that's very well known is Control W. That's backward kill word. That's kind of nice. Something that is less well known is undo. So Control _, that's Control Shift minus, will undo the last edit. So we can make slightly larger edits than just adding and removing a character at a time, and we can undo them. That's pretty cool. But this is a line editor. Its entire reason for existing is to edit things within one line. So there are lots of line-oriented things you can do. Like, for example, Control A to jump to the beginning of the line, Control E to jump to the end of the line. Meta T will swap the last two arguments. So I picked a bad example with bar and baz because it looks like only one character is changing, but those two whole words are switching place. When I say meta T, meta is kind of the alt key. If you're using any of the built-in OS X terminal, if you're using the built-in OS X terminal emulator or any of the popular ones, you don't have a meta key by default. You should enable it. It will change your life. It's somewhere in the preferences on both the OS X terminal and iTerm2 to make the alt key behave like meta or plus escape. Either of those things is fine. But it lets you do these things like alt-T or meta-T for transposing two arguments. If you've just got two letters the wrong way around, then Control-T will let you transpose those as well. So that's kind of handy sometimes. But this still doesn't feel quite like the kind of power we're used to. So let's get really crazy. If I execute this command, I maybe want to do something with the last argument of this again. I do this quite often I'll use something like git branch -d and then the name of a branch. And then I'll immediately want to also delete that branch from a remote. The command for that is git push :name. And that name part at the end is the same in both commands. So if I wanted to do something with this baz, this last argument, can I do that? Well, yeah, meta _ will pull in the last argument of the previous command. So I end up using that all the time. Cat meta _ doesn't exist, but you see the example. And it doesn't just have to be the last argument as well. You can also use, let's just do something for barbaz. So I think it's Control-Alt-Y. Yeah, so control meta y will pull in the first argument of the previous command. But if you want to get really crazy, you could hit, say, meta2, and then control meta y to pull in the second argument of the previous command. I pull in the last argument a lot. I pull in the first argument sometimes. But the point of this is that this is a full-featured editor that you've got built right into your terminal. Like, this isn't just something where you can type single letters and delete single letters. This is pretty powerful. A Vim feature that I use all the time is when you delete text, it goes into the unnamed register and then you can paste it again. Right? That's pretty useful in Vim. That's also true in Readline. So if I say echo bar, oh no wait, bar comes second, I didn't mean bar, so control W to delete last word, foo. Now I want the bar, well I can hit control Y to insert the last thing that I deleted. Y stands for yank. Confusingly, yank is the opposite thing that it is in Vim. In Vim, it's like take text out of the buffer and put it in a register. In Readline, it means take text out of a register and put it in the buffer. But it's yank.
They call it emacs too, I think, right?
I guess so. I mean, the default key bindings are based on emacs. They're not exactly like emacs. Like control W in emacs doesn't mean backward kill word. It means delete all the text between here and some other arbitrary point that I defined by accident 14 days ago, and oh, why are all my files empty? But like that's why I don't use VI mode, because I know Vim, and the VI mode isn't quite Vim, and so it's frustrating. And similarly, if you know Emacs, the Emacs mode isn't quite Emacs, so it's kind of frustrating. But I don't know Emacs, so I'm fine with the Emacs mode in Readline. Like I'm sure if you're a real Emacs user, you don't hit Control W by mistake and delete a bunch of stuff. But every time I try and use Emacs, I do because I'm used to Readline, not Emacs. Yeah, so those are a few things you can do with Readline. Hopefully that is useful. Oh, it has an RC file as well. Actually, that's worth knowing. You have a .inputrc where you can customize Readline. So I have expand tilde on, which means if I tab complete something with a tilde in it, it will expand to my home directory. I have the bell style set to visible, so if I do something that rings a bell, it's I can't think of how to ring a bell, but so if I do something that rings a bell, then it's going to be a visual thing rather than an audible thing. I have control N bound to menu complete, so I could say, I don't know, cat dot control N, and that gives me like, I can cycle through things like I would with control N or control P in Vim. So there's that. This part is kind of experimental. I maintain a shell that is integrating with Readline, and I wanted like a different set of key bindings if I'm there. Similarly, this is experimental if I'm using Readline from within Ruby. But you can even, like, if you're using Readline from within another program, you can bind different keys. So it's got an RC file. It's got a bunch of useful commands. You can do some really powerful editing with it.
Why is that command? Sorry, it's tilde on just visually on the server. You can see the.
Some commands prefer an absolute path rather than a relative path, and some things don't like tilde as well. And I just find that usually when I use tilde in an argument, I'm about to tab complete something, and if I just have expand tilde on, then it's easier. There are fewer problems. It's like, oh, that was meant to be absolute, or oh, this program doesn't understand tilde. So
when you like execute like a say bash script or shell script, does that need parse through Readline for each kind of evaluation variable?
no, Readline is only running in interactive mode. Yeah, so yeah, this is all just when you are interacting with Bash, or ZLE does similar things when you're interacting with Zshell.
Does Readline work within Vim? If I do Control A in Vim, does it go to the beginning of the line? And Control W and so on?
So readline isn't being used within Vim. I actually really wish that when you hit colon and went into command mode, it was readline, but it isn't. But you do get some things in Vim that. So like I think if I go back to Vim.
Backwards kill word should be useful.
Yeah, Control W for backward kill word. I think Control E. No, Control E doesn't work.
So not really.
Control A. No, that doesn't work either.
Just
There are some things that work.
We discovered the button.
If you are in if you're in like command mode, so say I want to cat.vimrc, there are some things that will work here like Control W, but it doesn't work the same way it works in readline. So in readline, if I say echo foo bar some path, not that I'd be echoing a path, but if I hit Control W, I'll kill the whole path. Which I can undo with Control _, and then if I hit actually meta backspace, I can kill components in the path. So what meta backspace does in readline is what Control W does in Vim, which is a little bit confusing, but different tools.
So you said that Readline was part of GNU Bash and other shells as well.
It's derived from GNU Bash, but it's distributed as like a standalone library. So like IRB for Ruby uses it. So there are like three implementations that are common. One is Readline, which comes from GNU. One is libedit, which is from one of the BSDs. Readline, like most of the features I've shown you are only supported in Readline. Libedit is a little bit watered down, like it has fewer features, but it does have a more permissive license, so if you're statically linking against it and you don't want to GPL your stuff, then you can use libedit, or you can GPL your stuff and use Readline, either way. And then the third common implementation is ZLE, but that is so tightly coupled to all the internals of Zshell that it's probably never going to be extracted as a standalone thing, which is kind of a shame because apparently it's more powerful than Readline, although I don't use Zshell, so I don't know the differences in detail, but there was a mailing list post where someone said, I'm going to extract ZLE, and then someone else replied and said, oh, I tried that once, it wasn't good. And then the thread ended and nothing's ever been heard about that project ever again, so I don't know.
So if I'm on a Mac, and pretty much I'm always like on a Mac in the terminal application when I'm using Bash, and I suppose Readline as well, are there things that the terminal app like adds to? I mean, everything, all like the keyword mappings basically, or the mappings that I use here, are those all just Readline things, or are some of those added by terminal?
Pretty much all of them are Readline things. Anything where you're holding down the command key, so like Command V, for example, to paste, that's going to be a just OS X thing. But anything where you're holding down the control key or the meta key, that's going to be a Readline thing. Like actually the OS X terminal out of the box is, in my opinion, kind of broken, because the alt key is an alt key, not a meta key. So, for example, I have mine configured so my left alt key is a meta key and my right alt key is an alt key. So if I hit Alt A, I get an A with I get like the Swedish or character, which is an A with a little circle, which also apparently doesn't support this font size, which is interesting. But if I use my left alt key, I get meta. But the default behavior in OS X is that either alt key is going to be an alt key. But I don't really often need to type special characters in the terminal. I more often need to use meta commands.
And if I want to learn more like the mappings and stuff, like should I just search Readline and look for the commands, or how do I?
There's a Readline. There are a bunch of Readline cheat sheets, which are interesting. I was refreshing my memory about a couple of commands with this one before the talk. But I just got here by searching for Readline cheat sheet. I think also the Bash manual page has some, let's see. Yeah, there's a whole readline section in the bash manual page which talks a lot about the different things that you can do. So the default key bindings and how to set up your own key bindings and all that kind of thing. Oh, if you're using Ruby on OS 10 and you're using like the default system Ruby, when you run IRB, you're getting libedit, not readline, because OS 10, with the weird exception of bash shipping as the default shell, OS 10 usually prefers BSD licenses to GNU licenses, so the readline implementation there is libedit, not readline. So a lot of these keystrokes won't work in like the Ruby IRB shell, but they will work if you install Ruby via Homebrew, because that will install readline. You shouldn't be using system Ruby anyway, it's bad. There's a blog post on robots.thoughtbot.com about it if you want to know why. I didn't write it, but... any other questions?
So the Ruby that ships with OS 10, which is probably what, like 193 now or something maybe? Or I think it used to be 187.
I think it's up to 1.9 now. Oh, 2.
So that even if you install the same version of 2.0 with like RBN or something, you're going to be using Readline as opposed to libedit?
With RBM or I think with RBM or with RVM, you can configure it to use readline if you have readline. But by default, you will only have libedit on OS 10. You won't have, like there's the readline that's compiled into bash, but you won't have a standalone readline that you can link other things against on OS 10. But you can also brew install readline, and then you can link things against it when you're building them. It's a little bit of a hassle to get it working with IRB on OS 10, but in my opinion, it's worth it. Like once you're used to using a bunch of these commands in the shell, and then you start trying to use them in places like IRB, it's worth the hassle of linking it against the right line editor to be able to use all your muscle memory when you're in there. Yeah.
Maybe off topic, but why did user local bin Ruby come up twice?
I don't know. I guess my path is broken. User local bin must be on my path twice, I guess. I should fix my computer.
I have two of the same path, but mine too. I mean, these shows
I've never seen a option that's very useful.
that's why.
So your main reason for not using the definition correctly, not using the IO is because it's not available and therefore it's going to distribute like that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, having separate muscle memory for I am in a shell, now I am in my editor, confuses me less than I am in a shell and like 75% of the stuff I do in my editor will work, but some stuff will just not work and other stuff will be completely different. Plus, if you're using bash, one of the default readline bindings in bash is Control X, Control E. So if I bring back my old echo foo bar baz, if I hit Control X, then Control E, that loads whatever command I was just editing in my $editor, which in my case is Vim. So if I really want to do some like serious editing of a multi-line thing, I can still get to Vim and do that. And then when I guess bang won't work, but when I exit this, it will then execute that command. So
Control X, Control 1.
Control X, Control E.
Use the bin, but you just press I
have it like that.
Are you using Zshell?
Yeah.
I think Zshell has it, but it's a different binding by default, and I don't use Zshell, so I don't know the default.
Mine does it. I'm also using like Go minus CSH, so I don't know if that changes it at all. I'm using like raw.
Thanks.